So now jumping into foreign film or just culturally different film. So it's not outside of Hollywood, I guess, is what I'm looking at. What are the big, like, kind of overarching differences? Are there differences based on, like, Bollywood is very distinct. I guess just as a jumping off point to talk about, like, films outside the Hollywood mainstream.
Yeah, Bollywood is a difficult one for a lot of other cultures and regions to get into because there's so much singing in them. Essentially, every movie is a musical at some point. And to a lot of other cultures, it feels like, why is that in there? Your movie stops and they start singing and it starts again. And that thing is, they're making those for their culture. That's what they essentially want. That's what they're used to. But of course, you get in that situation where just because you're used to something doesn't mean it's the best way to approach it. And each culture is going to tackle making a movie differently. Not just because there isn't one right way to do it. The only right way, essentially, for a film is if it was effective in telling your story. And there are limitless ways to do that. And most cultures are going to vary greatly from what we're used to in American and Hollywood-style movies. Their closest domestic analogy would be just independent filmmaking, because most of these foreign films don't have the big budget, such as like China is really trying to step up their filmmaking game, and they produced a really heavily budgeted science fiction action movie a couple of years ago called The Wandering Earth, I think it was. Which, as far as just concepts go, it was just out there. It's like, our sun is dying. Instead of us evacuating Earth, we're just going to evacuate the entire Earth to another star by building really big engines on it. And I'm like, as far as ambition goes, that's impressive.
Right.
But even given those really bombastic goals, which you would expect from a big budget American movie, it still doesn't feel American. It feels very foreign, which, if you go in there wanting that and accepting that, it's a great experience, because then you can use fiction as an educator. You can say, I know a little bit more about this place in the world and these people by the art they produce, and the stories they tell and how they tell them. And each country is going to give you that. Ireland's going to differ a little bit from Britain. South American films, which there's not a big list of those so far, are going to be different. Australian films are wonderfully different. They have an Australian feel, something like These Final Hours, to Road Games, to Romper Stomper, which was Russell Crowe's big break, which that is a difficult film to get through. Right. And even the Mad Max trilogy. And then you go to the Asian countries, like I said, China. Then you have Japan and South Korea. And then you consider, well, they have their mainstream and their dramatic films, but also the way they treat horror, which is one of the biggest cultural differences you can imagine from what Americans think it is. And there was that period of time in the mid-90s where every Japanese horror film was getting remade in America to lesser effect, which, harkens back to the question of, using a script. Will you get the same effect? In this case, no. You're losing the cultural influence from that story, which is basically something that can't be separated. Right. It's like trying to take someone's heart out of their body and expecting them to live. That story is dependent upon that culture. The long-haired girl ghost figure doesn't mean the same thing in America as it does in Asian cultures. Right. So I think it's one of the best things you can do, being a fan of film, is seeing what other countries and other filmmakers do with it and why they do it and what it means. Right. Even visually, they're going to tell that story differently. They're going to use slightly different technology. They're going to use different artistic influences. And it's not going to feel like watching a Hollywood movie, which puts people off. Then you insert subtitles down there. It's like, I have to read? I just want to watch this. But it's like, you're still getting the performance that way, as opposed to getting it dubbed.
Right. Or like, one of the things I noticed, and I'm not sure how prevalent this is, but like with anime, like there are some very dramatic anime. Whereas here, like our animated films, I mean, they might have like dramatic moments and stuff, but they're more entertainment. Whereas they'll have
Yeah.
like very serious. There was one movie, and I cannot remember the name of it. It was basically about the aftermath of Hiroshima,
Okay.
and it was all animated, but it was just very heavy. And here, I don't think we would do a very heavy animated, or at least I don't know. I don't know.
I
of
think
any.
every time it's been attempted domestically, it hasn't done so well. You've had things like Titan AE,
Okay.
which did so poorly it bankrupted the company. Yeah. Then you had something like Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, which was a visually stunning animated film, computer animated, and it really didn't know how to narratively tell its story, and it failed. Then you have something like from Studio Leica, Kubo and the Two Strings, which is a stop motion animation, which is stunning from every regard, from the story to visual execution. And it's like, and essentially that is an American film, but it felt like it was marketed to kids, even though it really is broad enough that it's for everyone. But going back to anime, a lot of it domestically is stigmatized. There is that person, the prototypical basement-dwelling person that sits there and all day and watches anime, but no, there is a lot of quality in some of it.
Right.
Not to say that all of it is equal, because it's not
Right.
with any genre, with anything.
Yeah.
But no, because Japanese culture takes animation seriously.
Right.
It's like, that's just a way to tell a story,
Yeah.
just to draw it. It's not less, it's not for kids. It's just, that's our way of doing it.
Kind of similarly, even domestically, you are getting more voices out there. You are getting a lot more women directors. You're getting people of color, just all over the place. How is that changing the types of movies that are getting ultimately made? Or maybe it's not yet.
Slowly, it is. I mean, there is some intransigence from the industry, unfortunately, but I think it's offering just different viewpoints and ways to tell a story, and stories that we haven't heard before. And I think we've all grown up with a lot of movies about, let's say the black experience and this and that, but it's directed and told by a white man.
Right.
It's like even a movie as fantastic as Glory, where it's introduced the world to Denzel Washington, and he won an Academy Award, I believe, is directed by a white man.
Right.
And it focused on General Shaw in that case, but it also was about his troops. And I think that it's long past overdue to give more women and just ethnic minorities a say in it. Because in the past, they had to kind of carve their own way into it. And in the 70s, were notorious for it, where you had the blaxploitation movement, which began as a way for black filmmakers to really tell their stories. Here's what our life is like in the inner city, and just oppression. And I mean, that's where we got the term whitey and everything like that. But it almost became a parody of itself toward the end. And it's just, you had less and less return on investment, so you had less and less voices doing that. And I think diversity is absolutely needed, not just in the personnel, but in the stories that are being told. Right. Because when you start treating it just as a bottom line commodity where everything is owned by Disney, you're going to get the same thing over and over and over. And I think we're going to get to a point where we're really sick of that.
Yeah. Just as a general, how is, like, with the way TV has changed, the way you were mentioning earlier, streaming and stuff. That was actually before we were on, but you were mentioning streaming and like the bigger budgets now. Are we starting to look at television in the same way we're looking at film, or are we getting to a point? Something like Game of Thrones, for instance. I mean, they have the budget of a movie. They have the stars that go into movies. Are we starting to look at TV in the same way?
I think finally, yes. At least artistically and as far as audience participation goes. As far as the actual business people and producers in Hollywood, not entirely. They still see it as competition for movies, and there is a lot of industry pushback for movies, Hollywood-created movies, debuting on streaming services because it will take away from box office revenue. But I think what the pandemic and what COVID has done has just kind of hastened the inevitable. It's like, this is going to happen. It was always going to happen. We're going to be seeing this stuff at home, and there's going to come a day where going to the movie theater is just a story you tell your grandkids. Right. Which isn't a bad thing. You know, cultures evolve, they change, our way of watching things changes. And as much as I like going to the movies, you know, it's a hassle. Right. It starts at a set time. You have to watch it with other people that might be texting or talking or throwing food or a crying baby. But it's like, I watch it at home and I can pause it and go to the bathroom. Right. I can make a sandwich. Right. And with TV technology these days, you're not missing a lot other than just the vastness of the experience. Right. But I think streaming services and episodic television found a really big weak point in traditional filmmaking, which is the time limitation. Now you can tell a story over a season or 2 or 3. You're not limited by 90 minutes or 2 hours. You can take your time, which is very attractive to a lot of actors. It's like they can really immerse themselves in that role and tell it at a pace that it should be told. Which I bring up pace, I think that is the one thing some of them haven't figured out yet, is quite how to pace a story over that span of time. And a lot of the Netflix original series, I think, really show that weakness. Okay. Much as I like Daredevil and Luke Cage and The Punisher, there's a lot of filler in those seasons. Right. Yep. It's like you could condense it, or throw a side plot in there, something like that. You don't need to draw it out to that length. Right. Unless you have a story that can be drawn out to that length. Okay. But I think it's a really interesting time for this to happen. It's like, it really has shaken a lot of things up, and it's given us a lot more things to watch and better ways to watch them. Yep. And it's like, at least at home, now I can stay at home and be disappointed by the new Wonder Woman instead of going all the way out to the theater and wasting gas.